CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Fixing the financial sector. China outlines stringent new regulations in an attempt to reboot economic growth.
In the Eurozone, economic growth is weaker than expected in the third quarter. We'll be in Brussels to see what it all means.
Fear and panic across Gaza. Israeli troops report large battles against Hamas as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejects calls for a ceasefire.
And the World Health Organization warns of an imminent public health catastrophe in Gaza amid mass displacement and infrastructure damage.
China has announced plans to fix its financial sector with more regulation and oversight. A new supervisory body will be set up to try and stabilise the country's troubled property market.
Top government officials have been gathering in Beijing for a two-day economic conference. Our correspondent Ho Jing reports.
China's Central Financial Work Conference held in Beijing on October 30th and 31st. Among many significant points, let me go through three of them. First, it emphasized the need for finance to offer high-quality services to support China's economic and social development. The government's focus should be on creating a favorable monetary and financial environment while strengthening high-quality financial services for key strategies, core sectors, and underdeveloped areas. Maintaining monetary policy stability, emphasizing cross-cycle and counter-cyclical adjustments, and expanding the monetary policy toolkit were also highlighted. Furthermore, the conference stressed the optimization of funding structures from the supply side. This involves allocating more financial resources to drive technical innovation, advance manufacturing, promote green development, and support small and medium-sized enterprises. It also encourages the implementation of innovation-driven and regionally coordinated development strategies to ensure national food and energy security. 5 key areas of financial services were identified. They are technology finance, green finance, inclusive finance, elderly care finance, and digital finance. The focus is on establishing modern financial institutions and market systems to direct funds into the real economy. Thirdly, the conference discussed the gradual expansion of institutional openness in the financial sector. This includes improving cross-border investment and financing facilitation and attracting foreign financial institutions and long-term capital for business development in China. The conference also outlined plans to enhance the competitiveness and influence of the Shanghai International Financial Center and solidify Hong Kong's status as an international financial center.
Let's talk to Xiaolin Chen, Head of International at Crane Shares. Xiaolin, welcome back on the programme. Well, it all sounds jolly good. Will it work?
It definitely will provide the long-awaited, long-needed boost in investors' confidence. All these policy announcements, I think most important is actually telling the market probably 3 things. One is the top policymakers in China is aware of the challenge. And second, they are willing to step in whenever needed. They would step in either providing the liquidity, the policy, or now the issuing more liquidity for the local government and infrastructure and projects to build out. Lastly, and which is most important, is now central government is willing to expand their physical budget to support the economic recovery. So altogether, it does give the positive signal to the market.
The economic levers have been pulled before, of course, with limited success. Why do you think it might work this time?
This time around, I think is a couple of things. One is, look at the equity market. It's really at a decade-low valuation. Market is purely driven now in assessing, allocating, or investing in China or not, purely at macro level. That means they are looking at policy, they are looking at the liquidity, and hence to decide their confidence into investing in China. So I think the policymaker realizing that it's not about too much of liquidity constraint issue in China's economy. It's about boosting investors' confidence. At the moment, they made PBOC very accommodative. Central government has issued the bond, now announcing the policy, opening for more reforms, more private playing, welcoming international investments. They are doing everything they could in their hands to boost the investors' confidence. I think you will see somehow the investors will back off with their concerns in investing in the country and start realizing fundamentals of the corporates in China is actually very healthy. They are consolidating. In the coming quarter, you could see a significant pickup in revenues for the Chinese corporates.
The agenda is packed on this gathering, the fractured property market, unemployment, economic growth, all under discussion. What key strategy, perhaps one strategy, that China should prioritise to ensure economic recovery and stability?
Make sure the liquidity they have provided to the market get flowed down to the small-sized business in China. The small enterprise, the corporates, even some private companies in the country should find a way to get access to those liquidity. Obviously, it takes time. The issued bonds will take the whole of this quarter to complete the issuance and make sure liquidity flow down to the system. I think the key is to watch, will the credits get picked up by corporates, by households, by small size of the company. So flow down, make sure the liquidity go down to the system to really, truly help the economy from bottom up is absolutely the key.
Xiaolin Chen, good to see you. Thanks for coming on the programme. Xiaolin Chen, Head of International at Crane Shares.
Pleasure.
Economic growth in the Eurozone was weaker than expected in the third quarter of the year. Eurozone GDP is estimated to have fallen 0.1% in the 3 months to September. Missing expectations, it would remain unchanged from the previous quarter. In the third quarter, France's economy grew 0.1%. Italy's GDP remained unchanged, while Europe's largest economy, Germany, recorded a 0.1% fall. Meanwhile, inflation across the Eurozone dropped to a two-year low of 2.9% in October, which was down from 4.3% the previous month. Let's talk to our correspondent, William Denslow in Brussels. So, Will, a bit of a mixed picture, it looks like, on Europe's economic outlook.
Yeah, Robin, absolutely. And if we look at some of the winners and losers from this latest bit of economic data here in Europe, when it comes to the winners, perhaps the best performance came out of Latvia, seeing 0.6% growth last quarter. Perhaps the biggest loser, Ireland's GDP for Q3, ticking down 1.8%. You mentioned Germany, very much indicative of the performance from the Eurozone, ticking down 0.1%. And this kind of growth isn't much of a surprise to either analysts or the European Central Bank. Many are expecting some rather anemic growth here in Europe for quite some time. The ECB has already predicted that the Eurozone will see 0.7% growth for this year, around 1% growth in 2024, just 1.5% growth in the year 2025. This comes as Europe continues to battle energy crisis as it pivots away from Russian energy, and inflation, while it certainly has come down a lot over the past 12 months or so, it remains stubbornly high.
Well, let's talk about that inflation, because it is certainly moving in the right direction, isn't it? What's contributed to it easing across the Eurozone?
Well, it has come down substantially since this time last year, where it was up at a record 10.6%. So price pressures have cooled substantially. We have seen the European Central Bank for 10 consecutive meetings raise interest rates, now standing at around 4% until it took a pause at its most recent meeting. And we're seeing both in Europe and around the world that these kind of moves from central banks are starting to have somewhat of the desired effect when it comes to fighting price pressures. If we, though, look a little bit further into these latest metrics, if we take out volatile food and energy prices and just look at core inflation, well, that still stands at 4.2%, which is well above the 2% core inflation rate that the European Central Bank still wants to see. That is why analysts and this ECB in the past has said that they are prepared to keep interest rates high for for as long as it takes. They're seeing wages start to cool. That might be a bad sign, at least in the short term, for consumers. But the hope is that by keeping interest rates elevated, we'll start to see inflation come down closer to the central bank's target of 2%.
Will, thank you very much. Our correspondent William Denslow in Brussels.
Shop prices in the UK have fallen to their lowest level in a year. Annual retail inflation dropped to 5.2% in October. That's down from 6.2% a month earlier in the fifth consecutive monthly decline. It's raised the prospects of retailers that lower prices could boost household spending over Christmas. Japan's currency, the yen, has slumped after the country's central bank took a smaller than expected step towards ending years of monetary stimulus. The Bank of Japan made changes to its bond yield control policy, but investors wanted those changes to go further. The yen fell to a 15-year low against the euro and a one-year low against the US dollar. The Chinese tech giant Alibaba is updating its current artificial intelligence model and releasing several more. They offer dedicated tools for creating images, writing computer code, analysing financial data and searching for legal documents. Alibaba says its servers now run around half of all large language AI models in China.
More British companies are going out of business than at any point since the financial crisis in 2009. Official figures show the number of insolvencies in England and Wales rose 10% year-on-year in the third quarter. Construction, retail and hospitality were among the hardest hit. The UK is no longer capping one-off bonus payments made to bankers. The government announced last week it would scrap an EU-era law which limited additional handouts to twice someone's annual salary. Unions have called the decision obscene, saying it will encourage greed. Bank chiefs say it means salaries will be lower, making it easier to recruit new talent and respond to market changes.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, mass displacement, critical infrastructure destroyed. We'll have the latest update on the humanitarian situation in Gaza.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Join us in San Francisco on November 14th through 16th for the most influential meeting of the world's leaders and business executives in the Asia Pacific. The APEC CEO Summit 2023 will focus on creating economic opportunity. The summit will promote sustainability, inclusion, resilience, and innovation across the Asia Pacific. Don't miss your chance to be part of the conversation. Request your invitation at apecceosummit2023.com.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Israel and Hamas have reported large ground battles across Gaza as the World Health Organization warns of an imminent public health catastrophe in the besieged Palestinian enclave.
The Palestine Red Crescent Society says Israeli airstrikes near a hospital in Gaza City are causing fear and panic among health workers and civilians sheltering there. Health authorities say more than 8,500 Palestinians have now been killed since the 7th of October, when Hamas fighters attacked and killed 1,400 Israelis. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected calls for a ceasefire.
Just as the United States would not agree to a ceasefire after the bombing of Pearl Harbor or after the terrorist attack of 9/11, Israel will not agree to a cessation of hostilities with Hamas after the horrific attacks of October 7th. Calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorism, to surrender to barbarism. That will not happen.
Well, Palestinian officials say at least 50 people have been killed by an Israeli airstrike on the Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza. Our correspondent Akram Al-Satari has the latest.
Well, as a matter of fact, that is a very good question. Where else can people go in Gaza? People who moved from the north to the south are now being killed in the south. People who moved from the Gaza city to Rafah are being targeted in Rafah. People who moved to Khan Yunis are also being targeted. We have been witnessing a very large bombardment in the last 1 hour or so, at least for 45 minutes, non-stop sirens. In this background area, the ambulances are coming and the hospital is clogged with a large number of people who were injured and killed. At least a house with 6 floors, 18 IDPs family, 18 internally displaced families were coming to that house, gathering in that house in the Nusayrat area, and they ended up being targeted by the Israeli forces. Around tens of people are still under the rubble. There are unconfirmed number of people who are killed, unconfirmed number of people who are injured, and people are struggling now. Civil Defense, Minister of Health, Palestinian Red Crescent Society, and many other volunteers are trying to remove the debris and to save the lives of the people with the very minimum resources that they have. Also, we have some very shocking news coming from Jabalia. At least 20 houses were targeted with 6 missiles, apparently 2 or 1 tons, 1,000-pound rockets, the missiles that hit the whole area, destroying 20 houses. According to the initial reports coming from the Ministry of Health, the number of people who are confirmed to be dead is 100, and the number is expected to rise to be close to the number of people who were killed in the Baptist hospital. So people have no safe haven, nowhere to go, and even if they moved from one area to another seeking safety and seeking life, they end up being killed and losing their life by the ongoing bombardment that is non-stop for the 24 past days.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent in Tel Aviv, Sarah Coates. So, Sarah, what are the Israeli Defense Forces saying about what's happening in Gaza?
Well, look, it's reporting extremely heavy clashes deep inside the Gaza Strip, saying its forces on the ground and in the air are targeting numerous Hamas positions, adding that they've killed fighters and a senior Hamas commander. We haven't heard much comment yet on this airstrike on the Jabalia refugee camp that your other correspondent was just speaking about. But look, what we just heard from Israel's southern commander certainly shows that these forces may be moving ahead into a new stage just in a matter of hours. He said that we will fight in tunnels, we'll fight wherever necessary, we will eliminate the enemy before whom we stand, get ready to strike the enemy over and out. Now, look, there's not just fighting in the southern regions, there's fighting in the north with Hezbollah militants, and also in the West Bank with Israeli security forces continuing to conduct raids, saying that they are weeding out what they say are Hamas operatives, Hamas militants, also blowing up the home of a deputy Hamas commander very early this morning, although we do need to mention that he is living in exile, presumably in southern Lebanon, and no one was at home at the time.
And Sarah, Benjamin Netanyahu has been speaking about the video that's been released of 3 women hostages being held in Gaza.
Yeah, look, really desperate pleas coming from these 3 Israeli women who are purportedly being held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. We do know that this number, according to the Israeli Defense Forces, has now gone up to 240 people. We do need to add that more people are still missing, so that number could further rise. Now, they were calling on the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, for some kind of ceasefire to desperately get them out. But look, it certainly seems, going off Netanyahu's words last night, that that help will not be coming. And we've also just heard from the head of Israel's National Security Council. He says he does not see a deal for release of hostages being close. Now, this is causing a whole lot of angst among families here on the ground and abroad who have families and friends and loved ones being held in the Gaza Strip, with protests continuing to demand the Israeli establishment do more to release these people.
Sarah, thank you very much. Our correspondent Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv.
China has once again called for a ceasefire in this conflict. The country's permanent representative to the United Nations was speaking at the latest Security Council meeting.
China solemnly calls on Israel as the occupying power to fulfill its obligation under international humanitarian law, lift its full siege on Gaza, immediately rescind its emergency evacuation order, and quickly restore the supply of basic necessities to prevent an even larger humanitarian disaster. China solemnly calls for greater diplomatic efforts to facilitate the release of hostages without delay, and to work on the spaces to open up space for dialogue and return towards a path of a political settlement.
The Israeli military says it struck Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, including weapons infrastructure. The armed group has been exchanging fire with Israeli forces across the border since Hamas attacked southern Israel on October the 7th. It's the deadliest border escalation since the two sides fought a major war in 2006.
Japan has announced sanctions on 9 people it claims to have links to Hamas. The foreign ministry says the assets of a number of people are to be frozen, along with a company suspected of funding militants in Gaza. Tokyo's sanctions follow similar measures taken by the United States earlier this month.
Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives have proposed plans to send over $14 billion of aid to Israel. The deal would be funded by cutting back on cash allocated to the Internal Revenue Service. It's expected to cause a standoff with Democrats who control the Senate, who are backing a wider support package of over $100 billion to support Ukraine as well as Israel.
And the United States has dismissed Russia's attempt to blame Ukraine and the West for an anti-Israeli riot at an airport in the Muslim-majority area of Dagestan on Sunday. A group of pro-Palestinian demonstrators raided Makashkala Airport in Russia's North Caucasus shortly after a plane arrived from Tel Aviv. The White House has denied any role, saying the riot was a display of hate, bigotry and intimidation.
The United Nations says the largest convoy of aid yet passed through the Rafah crossing on Egypt's southern border on Sunday.
33 trucks carrying food and essential supplies entered Gaza, but that's still far below what the region was getting before the fighting broke out 3 weeks ago. Well, Iman Trabelsi is from the International Committee of the Red Cross. Good to see you. Welcome back to the programme. We understand your organisation managed to get, I think, 9 trucks of aid into Gaza. What are you hearing from your people on the ground?
That 9 trucks are not enough, and the over 200 trucks that made it over the past days, towards Gaza, although we do consider that it is still a positive step, but it's still not sufficient in comparison with the huge, immense needs that we are seeing among populations as they're struggling to access everything still. 25 days of fierce fighting, 25 days of violence, of terror for civilians, but most of all, it's 25 days without minimal access to either safety, proper shelter, food, water, health, etc. So we do consider that it is a step forward, but it remains the responsibility of the parties to the conflict, the countries of influence, to work on a sustainable plan for further aid to be channeled in a sustainable way, of course, but also to take into consideration the actual needs of the populations and all of those needs. And of course, we as humanitarian actors, we do still the proper security guarantees in order for us to be able to work to deliver that aid without risking our own lives. And that is the responsibility of the parties to the conflict. There is it's not something that the ICRC or any humanitarian actor could deliver or could guarantee.
Given that food is running out, let me ask you about security and civil order. What's your information about how the community is dealing with that?
Could you develop more your question? I'm afraid that I might not have understood it properly.
Let me ask you, how is security in Gaza, given that the food is running out, and in particular around hospitals where many people are sheltering?
So the security-wise, I mean, when you talk to people on the field, on the ground, civilians, like regular people, people are saying that there is nowhere safe for them. There is a general feeling of lack of safety. I was talking to one of my colleagues who have been living in a shelter for the last 2 weeks, and one of the things that he would on the regular describe how atmosphere in those shelters is like. One of the things that he mentioned is that there is significant signs of distress, psychological distress, especially among children. There is signs of anxiety, bedwetting. People, grown-ups as well as children, are afraid for their own lives. Today we are seeing, we're witnessing the fact that families have nowhere to go. Most of the time they're in the streets. They're left. They're left. It's as if they're left by themselves and alone to figure out how to survive. People are finding shelters in hospitals, and yet even that is not guaranteed as in terms of safety. So today there is a responsibility that falls on the shoulders of the parties to the conflict to protect civilians, to grant them a dignified access to basic human needs, and first and foremost, to respect their legal obligation under international humanitarian law when it comes to civilian and civilian objects protection.
What items are seeing the most serious shortages, and how are doctors and medical teams managing without medicines?
Barely managing. We managed to enter 9 trucks consisting mainly of medical equipment, surgical equipment, which is it's very needed at the moment, as well as products to clarify water, such as chlorine tablets. The equipment that we managed to enter should cover the needs of up to 5,000 injured people. That is nothing compared to what the hospital actually needs. The hospital needs further equipment, further assistance, further human resources. And by the way, the ICRC also managed on Friday to our first team of war surgery specialists entered Gaza, as well as other types of specialists as of Friday. But that remains very little compared to the state of distress that the health sector is witnessing as we're speaking. The needs are high, the equipment are not there, human resources are fading as health staff are exhausted by constant pressure and increasing pressure. There is a need for more. But first and foremost, there are things that we were not able to channel up until this moment, including, for instance, fuel, which is a very important point as it will keep hospitals running. So far, hospitals are not able to access additional stocks of fuel, which means that at any moment, the hospitals among the few hospitals actually who are still functioning in Gaza might stop activities completely. That means that babies in incubators might lose their life at any minute. People who need ventilation assistance might lose their lives at any minute. And this, again, we come back to the responsibilities to the parties to the conflict to take into consideration the real needs of the population, the real need to keep basic services running in such circumstances.
Iman, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme again. Iman Trabelsi from the International Committee of the Red Cross.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, working together on the world's most difficult challenges. China and France sit down to talk.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. At least 50 people are reported killed in an explosion at the Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza. Hamas has blamed an Israeli airstrike.
Our other headlines. In the Eurozone, economic growth is weaker than expected in the third quarter, while inflation falls to a two-year low.
And fixing the financial sector. China outlines stringent new regulations in an attempt to reboot economic growth.
Work together to fix the world's many problems. That's the key message from talks between China and France. The two countries reiterated that multilateralism and the United Nations must be the driving forces in solving international disputes.
China's foreign minister met the French president's diplomatic counselor, Emmanuel Bon, in Beijing. Wang Yi says China and France must work together to avoid confrontation. Bon says France has confidence in China's economy and is not seeking to limit its development. Douglas Yates is a doctor of political science at the American Graduate School in Paris.
Well, what stands out for me is that in light of the growing regional tensions between the East and the West, particularly over issues like Ukraine and Taiwan, France is still able to chart a somewhat independent autonomous court diplomatically and establish annual meetings between Macron and President Xi.
Well, we did see, of course, President Macron visiting China earlier this year. Do you think France has a different approach, a different relationship with China than Europe?
Well, yes, although when he returned from his trip, he tried to assure his European partners that France is harmonized with Europe on issues, for example, like Taiwan, where both Europe and France are for the status quo. But he insisted that if push comes to shove, France is willing to seek its strategic autonomy. And this phrase that he keeps repeating indicates that France is willing to go it alone if the European Union takes positions which aren't reflective of its national interests.
And there was lots of talk, wasn't there, of partnership and cooperation. Do you think we'll see any concrete steps from this meeting?
Oh, yes. You know, when a French president travels to an important trading partner, and China's France's #3 trading partner, there's almost always some kind of deal in the works. And here we're talking about 160 to 180 Airbus airplanes. French presidents love to sell their airplanes. I would expect something very concrete in that dimension.
And you talked a little bit about some of the global challenges that we're facing at the moment, the conflict in the Middle East, in Ukraine. How significant is this meeting, do you think, given that backdrop?
Well, I think what the game that France could play is a mediator, because there'll be times when the United States is going to be speaking in a bellicose fashion with China. And during those times, when tensions get high, Macron could go and use this diplomatic person-to-person diplomacy that he's developing with the Chinese leadership to try to run some interference and try to get people back to the table. So I think it's very positive.
The car maker General Motors and members of the United Auto Workers Union have struck a tentative deal ending an unprecedented series of 6-week strikes that dealt a severe blow to the Detroit auto industry. This comes after similar agreements with Ford and Stellantis. Let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett in New York. John, are we there yet? Is this car strike over?
Yes. Yeah, basically, I think so, to be honest with you. Started with Ford last week, Stellantis at the weekend, General Motors yesterday. And look at these share prices. Ford up 2.6%, Stellantis 4%. You know, Stellantis is always up or down more than the others. I never really know why that is. But anyway, General Motors ahead by 3%. GM is offering around 30% when all is said and done to the top earners. Pretty much the same as Stellantis and the Ford deal from last week. Only ratification stands in the way, and I don't think that's going to be a problem because the union leadership is on board with this. They're very excited, very proud of themselves, and I think the membership will fall into line as well. I know that the Ford workers are back at the plants. I'm not sure about Stellantis and GM, but I would think they've got to be. No point in coming to an agreement and not returning to work immediately. For the UAW and their boss, Shawn Fain, this is a significant victory, backed, of course, by President Joe Biden, who calls himself the most pro-union president ever in the country's history. 1/3 of Shawn Fain's members took part in this strike around the country, and it cost the 3 big car companies, Ford, GM and Stellantis, millions of dollars, if not billions. I think it was billions, actually, when you total it all up, in lost production. And the only question now, assuming it is ratified, which I think it will be, as I've said, the only question now is who's next? Who are they going to go after now? Because they've had a great success and they're empowered, you see. And Shawn Fain, who's the boss of the UAW, is already talking about those car companies in the South. Because, you see, in America, the big 3 are up in Detroit, Ford, GM and Stellantis. But in the South, for the last 30 years, going on for 40 years now, lots of overseas car makers like Toyota, who reported their numbers today, and they were pretty good, by the way. Honda, Mercedes, Kia, VW, to name just a few. They're all in the South, in the deep South. Now, I don't know what their union status is. I think some of them have union contracts, some of them don't, all that kind of stuff. But we know that the UAW has its eye on them. So we'll see what happens next.
Mortgage holders, savers and those with bank loans watching the next 24 hours very carefully indeed. The Fed begins its 2-day meeting.
Yeah, they're having their lunch on the first day now down in Washington, D.C., just opposite the Vietnam War Memorial there on Constitution. That's where the Fed is. They meet all day Tuesday. They meet all morning on Wednesday. And we can expect the decision at 18 hours GMT, about 2 hours after this show comes off the air tomorrow, Wednesday. The bet here is that there will be another pause. And John's going to go further. This is me. Set your Betamax video recorder, Jamie, to record this, because I'm going to tell you now they will not hike interest rates tomorrow, okay? It's going to be a pause. They just won't. Nobody here thinks there's going to be a hike. And this despite GDP growth coming in at 4.9% last week. I mean, just think, it struck me over the weekend how remarkably good that is. America's economic growth in the last quarter was almost 5%, just a gnats away from 5%. When Trump was running in 2016, which he won, he was predicting that he would get economic growth to 5%, and Biden's done it. And all anybody wants to hear is that there isn't 5%. It's extraordinary. The consumer is very strong. We just simply don't know why, what they're spending, where they're getting the money from. Is it stimulus money that they've saved? Are they spending every single penny of their wage checks? And the jobs market is very strong as well. Now, we might see a rate hike in December. Can't rule that out, but certainly not tomorrow. The bigger question is, when will they cut? When will they cut? That's what Wall Street wants to know. And they won't do that until the unemployment rate ticks back up to 5% and inflation is at 2%. And I don't think we're going to get inflation at 2% probably in our lifetimes, quite frankly. So the Fed will talk all around this and never actually tell you, which is what they do. You know, they talk a good talk, and then they sometimes move and sometimes don't. And tomorrow they won't move. Jamie?
I'm just writing a note to myself to play back your predictions on tomorrow's show. Meanwhile, let's talk about oil and BP's earnings. They're out, aren't they?
Yes, a bit of a head... Oh, did you see why I caught that pen? That was very cool, wasn't it? A bit of a head scratch of this. I asked somebody... I have a great pal here who knows these things, and he doesn't know the answer to this either. And I think it's because BP really trades in London and is not well liked here on Wall Street, which I'll tell you about in just a second. I mean, all the oil majors have been missing their numbers. That is to say, not as good as Wall Street thought. We saw it last week with Exxon and Chevron, and now British Petroleum as well. Their profits rebounded, so that's very good, but they could have done better. Now, their oil business was okay, but their gas business was weaker, and I don't know why that is, and I can't find out why that is. But just take it from me, the reason that these numbers missed today is because the gas side of their business, the gas production side, came in weaker than expected, and BP shares are down 5% in London. Now, BP has problems because its boss until September was a loony. Oh boy, was he a loony. I mean, for a boss, he was a real loony. It was Bernard Looney, and he resigned in September abruptly because he couldn't get on with his colleagues. So now a man called Murray Auchincloss is running the company, and there is takeover chatter in the air. And you saw it last week with Exxon and Chevron going after US oil majors. They both had big takeovers. It's not inconceivable that somebody could put a bid in for BP. And finally, remember, BP is not well liked here. They remember how badly BP handled the oil Gulf spill in 2010, and memories here are very long. Let me just tell you the Dow and the NASDAQ. Dow's up 38 points, S&P 500 is up 7. I can't see the NASDAQ, so basically we're flat on the final day of October. Jamie and Robin.
John, thank you for that. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York. The wrong people in the wrong jobs. That's the view of a former top advisor to the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson during the pandemic. Dominic Cummings has been testifying at an inquiry into COVID-19. He described UK government decision-making as a dumpster fire, but was questioned over his own role, including messages he'd sent containing extreme language. More than 230,000 people died from the virus in Britain, a higher per capita rate than most European countries.
King Charles has begun a 3-day state visit to Kenya. British monarch and Queen Camilla were welcomed by President William Ruto in Nairobi. Kenya is a former British colony, and there are calls for the UK to apologise for abuses carried out during its rule. It's Charles's first official visit to a Commonwealth country since he succeeded his mother last year.
A New Zealand tour company has been found guilty of safety breaches after 22 people died during a volcanic eruption in 2019. That judgment came at the end of a trial against 13 companies, of which 7 were found guilty and 6 had charges dismissed. Wakari Management, which licenses tours to the island, was accused of astonishing failures. The company faces a fine of nearly $1 million.
Germany used to be considered the height of efficiency and reliability, competent at building infrastructure from roads to bridges and making the trains run on time.
But despite being Europe's largest economy, years of underspending on maintenance has taken a toll. Our correspondent Natalie Carney reports.
Germans are known for being debt-averse, committed to a balanced budget. However, cracks are appearing from years of limited investments, particularly in the country's once admired infrastructure. More motorists on German roads and highways, coupled with patchy maintenance, has led to regular bumper-to-bumper traffic.
The highway network since 1990 has increased for 20%. and the rail network has decreased. And with the lack of investments, public money and maintenance, we have a lot of bridges, for example, on the highway network that need to be maintained, and some of them even need to be replaced. The transport infrastructure planning should be really clear: rail before road and maintenance before expanding.
According to Germany's Federal Ministry of Transport, freight traffic will have grown 38% by 2030 over 2010 levels, while the country continues to register a record number of passenger cars year on year. Better utilization of the country's rail networks would help ease the pressure on roads and highways, but for now, this is not a solution. Last year, state-owned Deutsche Bahn, which transports 2 billion customers a year, announced that its punctuality quota fell to a record low of 65.2%. Passenger association ProBahn also argued that Germany's rail network has not been a priority, with some of the most populated areas of the country still operating with old technology for which spare parts no longer exist.
The problem with the German railway infrastructure goes back years. We have concentrated for far too long on further expanding our road system. The railway has always been running on the side. We have been able to create glamorous projects based on fast connections, but the money for the small cities and towns have been lost. The money has simply been spent on prestigious projects.
In 2016, Berlin recognized its infrastructure was lagging behind other EU countries and adopted the Federal Transport Infrastructure Plan, FTIP, a $285 billion project to modernize roads, highways, rail lines and bridges by 2030. Yet even that, many argue, needs modernizing.
Germany's rail and road networks are showing signs of considerable decline amidst accusations of underinvestment as well as increased traffic. Yet while Berlin has allocated billions of euros towards retrofitting these critical arteries, the figures in the 2030 Federal Transport Infrastructure Plan were decided upon prior to the intake of over 2 million refugees and historic inflation.
If inflation hadn't become a problem, we would have already completed many projects. We want to get a network that is for the future, not just for now.
Others don't see the FTIP as being in line with the country's climate goals.
Planners and the government should look at the transport system that we want to have in 2045, when we are going to be climate neutral, and then build the infrastructure respectively, which is not the case. Nowadays, infrastructure is being built for what is predicted. So building more roads causes more traffic, and this is not leading to this green transport system we want to have.
While revisions to the FTIP are being considered in Berlin, there is no word on whether its budget will be increased, leaving improvements on mobility across the country at a yellow light. Natalie Carney, CGTN, Munich.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. No more traffic jams or congestion. Why Spain is looking up when it comes to the next generation of taxis.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw. The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. 3 Chinese astronauts have landed safely back on Earth after spending nearly 5 months on board the country's space station.
The crew of Shenzhou 16 touched down successfully. Our correspondent Sun Ye reports.
Shenzhou 16 crew has landed back home here at the Dongfeng landing site, and they have spoke their first emotional, heartfelt words on the ground.
I feel very excited at this very moment. Finally, we came back home. This trip took 5 months, but it feels so good that we have successfully completed all the tasks. And I want to address my gratitude to my dear colleagues. I am so happy to come back home. I'm very lucky to get the chance to execute the task in space as flight engineer. I want to express my gratitude for being a member of this generation, which offered me this platform to realize my dream. It feels so good to complete the task successfully. In the past 5 months, we have been supported in every way we could be. With the lead of the commander, we have spent every day in the space station enriched.
The Shenzhou 16 crew had an in-orbit handover on Sunday with the newly arrived Shenzhou 17 crew. The Shenzhou 16 crew had also alternated with the Shenzhou 15 crew when they first arrived at the space station in late May. The Shenzhou 16 mission was the first since China's space station entered long-term operation. The crew's makeup was also the first to include a pilot, a flight engineer, and a payload specialist. While in orbit, Dave conducted a large amount of experiments and a spacewalk. Dave maintained and installed equipment for the space station. They live-streamed a science lesson to students nationwide, as Dave also talked with people from home and abroad, asking them to work together in space exploration for the benefit of all humankind. And after their safe return to Earth, the Shenzhou 16 mission is officially a complete success. Sun Ye, CGTN, 酒泉.
Enhancing ties with China is at the heart of a British government-supported scheme allowing UK students to undertake a language programme in the country.
So far this year, more than 100 students have taken part in the Mandarin Excellence Programme. Our correspondent Liu Yang reports.
Join one of the world's most beloved animals, the giant panda, takes imagination and, of course, careful observation from on-site at the Chengdu research base of giant panda breeding. At this exhibition, all art pieces were created by UK and Chinese students to raise awareness of this iconic species. At the same time, the students deepened their understanding of the Chinese language and culture.
Via this trip to China, many activities inspired them a lot and had a significant impact on their outlook on life. Many British students said they hope to come to China to continue studying Chinese in the future.
Visiting Sanxingdui, the ancient Chinese archaeological relics site, was a sightseeing highlight of this trip. Students said they were amazed to see the depth of Chinese culture through the relics gear, like the gold masks, the giant standing figures, and the ancient bronze tree. And many said that they now want to learn more about China's history.
I think it's been really interesting to, experience a new culture because it's so different here. It's like everything's massive. It's incredible to be somewhere, and the history is, the Chinese history that we've learnt about in this museum and the Museum of Art that we've been to.
Just fascinating seeing, especially coming from London or England, where we've got such an ancient culture as well. We have things like Stonehenge, and these people in 1300 BC were managing to make these unbelievable artifacts. I think it's just breathtaking.
Over the past 7 years, the Mandarin Excellence Program has helped some 11,000 British students develop their Mandarin skills. The lucky ones on this trip also experienced the cultural immersion through activities from sports to calligraphy and cooking, opening opportunities for unique life experiences and lasting cross-cultural friendships. Liu Yang, CGTN, Sichuan Province.
Now, how about this? No more traffic jams, no more congestion. Just imagine taking a trip across town in a flying car is closer than you think. The Chinese company Yihang has been showing off its unmanned airborne taxi in Spain. Our correspondent Ken Brown has the story.
What was once considered science fiction has now become a reality, and flying cars are ready for takeoff. China's Yihang is the world's first company to create a certified airworthy passenger-carrying flying taxi. Here in Lleida, northern Spain, they've just opened their new European Operations Centre, and there's a real buzz of excitement for what's ahead.
My dream was to build a small plane I could fly myself, but it wasn't long before I fulfilled my dream. So what next? I wanted all people to experience this, so I turned it into an industry. This is not something that is out of reach. It's already here, and soon it will be part of everyone's life.
Yihang's EH216S is a potential game-changer in urban mobility, but also in emergency situations and tourism too. It has a vertical takeoff and landing system which suits city travel and is 100% electric. This two-person aircraft is powered by 16 rotors and can fly over 30 kilometers for each journey, a milestone in aviation history. Passenger safety is always a concern, but Yihang are already running this service across various cities in China and have now tested this model in over 14 countries, clocking over 40,000 flight hours. The global air taxi market tripled over the past year to over $3 billion. It's an industry that looks set to take off here in Europe, with the first passenger flights on target to be scheduled next year. Ken Brown, CGTN, Lleida.
The headlines again. Fixing the financial sector. China outlines stringent new regulations in an attempt to reboot economic growth.
Our other headlines: in the Eurozone, economic growth is weaker than expected in the third quarter, while inflation falls to a two-year low.
And at least 50 people are reported killed in an explosion at the Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza. Hamas blames an Israeli airstrike.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
There's more on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Facebook, Instagram and TikTok.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.